Before we dive in, remember, facing the dark side of ourselves isn't easy. But if this video resonates with you, consider liking and subscribing. That way, we continue together on this journey of mirrors and truths no one wants to hear, but everyone needs.
You think confidence protects you. You think certainty makes you strong. You think control keeps you safe. But Jung warned, sometimes what looks like power is just fear in disguise. That's what this video is about. The truth behind the persona you built. The fear behind the strength you perform. The mask you use to hide what you don't want anyone to see. And the quiet collapse that begins the moment the mask cracks. Because that's the real danger of the inflated ego. It doesn't make you powerful. It makes you fragile. It makes you loud when you're scared. It makes you rigid when you feel small. It makes you fight harder exactly when you're falling apart inside. In the next minutes, you'll understand why your overconfidence isn't confidence at all, and why the strength you show the world is often the exact opposite of the truth. You'll see why you cling to the mask, why you fear taking it off, and what happens when the mask finally shatters. And here's the part no one tells you. The moment the mask breaks is the moment your real face finally appears. But what you find under it is not always what you expect. Stay with me, because once you see what's behind your confidence, you can never unsee it.
You learn early that the world rewards performance. Not honesty, not fear, not uncertainty, but the ability to look unshakable. So you build a version of yourself that feels safer than who you actually are. Over time, that version becomes a shield. Every gesture is calculated, every silence rehearsed, every expression chosen to hide the tremor underneath. Strength becomes a pose, not a truth. And because the world can't see your fear, it believes your act. It applauds the confidence, the certainty, the control, and you start confusing applause with acceptance. You begin mistaking performance for identity. But the truth is simple. You don't raise your chin because you're strong. You raise it because you're terrified of what happens if you look down. Confidence becomes a way to outrun your own shadow. The louder you speak, the less you're willing to hear. And every argument becomes a battlefield, because being wrong feels like being exposed. You don't defend your opinion, you defend the mask. You craft answers before the question is even asked. You prepare comebacks, build personas, polish every angle of your presence. Not to be admired, but to avoid being seen. Because power for you isn't about dominance, it's about protection. And the performance is the armor you wear to survive a world that feels constantly threatening. It's easier to act untouchable than to admit you feel fragile. But here's the lie no one warns you about. The more fragile you feel, the stronger you perform. The weaker you feel, the more you inflate your stance. The performance grows in the exact places you feel smallest. It becomes exhausting to keep pretending. You start waking up already tired because the mask you wear weighs more than the life you live. And yet, you hold it up, afraid of what collapses if you let it fall. Every moment of silence becomes dangerous, because silence is the only thing that speaks honestly, and honesty is what the persona can't survive. So you fill every gap with certainty, even when you have none. You move through the world like an actor afraid of dropping a line. Every interaction is a scene you must win, every room a stage you must dominate. And deep down you know this isn't strength, it's survival. The persona keeps growing until it no longer protects you, it imprisons you. It becomes bigger than your truth, heavier than your fear, louder than your voice. And you become a spectator of your own performance. But even the strongest acts crack under their own weight. No performance lasts forever, no mask stays whole. And the moment it begins to fracture, the truth you've avoided starts to surface. The collapse never starts with noise. It starts with a quiet you can't outrun. A moment where the persona fails and the real face slips through. That's the moment your performance stops protecting you and starts revealing you.
You don't inflate your ego because you think you're better. You inflate it because you're afraid of what happens if you're not. Fear is the engine that makes the persona move. There's a moment in every life where uncertainty becomes unbearable. You start sensing the fragility beneath your confidence, and instead of facing the fear, you build higher walls. The ego expands exactly where you feel weakest. It grows over your insecurities like armor welded to your skin. And soon, the armor becomes heavier than the wound it protects. Fear teaches you to act louder than you feel, to speak before you think, to dominate before you understand. Because silence is dangerous. It reveals too much. Every insecurity becomes a threat you must neutralize. Every challenge becomes a battlefield you can't afford to lose. You don't want victory. You want safety. Deep down, you fear insignificance. Not being enough. Not being chosen. Not being seen. So you create a version of yourself big enough to hide behind. But fear doesn't disappear when you hide it. It adapts, it waits, it shapes your thoughts from the shadows. You feel it every time someone gets too close to the truth. The ego becomes the negotiator between you and your deepest wound. It bargains, distracts, manipulates, not to hurt others, but to protect you. The tragedy is that it protects you from the wrong things. Because what you fear isn't the world. It's yourself, the parts of you you've never accepted, the parts you avoid by pretending to be stronger than you are. You start measuring your worth by your impact on others, by how often you win, how much you control, how much you dominate. But domination is just fear wearing a crown. Fear convinces you that vulnerability is humiliation, that softness is weakness, and silence is surrender. So you reject everything that could bring you closer to yourself. The more you fear collapse, the more you inflate the ego. The bigger you feel on the outside, the smaller you feel on the inside. Your persona rises as your inner world sinks. One day, you wake up and realize the fear never left. It only learned to hide behind confidence. And the mask you built to feel safe became the prison you live in. The fear that built the ego becomes the fear that controls the ego. And now the thing you created to protect yourself is the very thing keeping you from ever feeling whole. And as long as fear is the architect of your identity, your ego will keep expanding to cover wounds that were never meant to be covered, only understood.
There comes a point where the persona stops being a mask and starts becoming a creature with a life of its own. Jung warned, the danger is not wearing the persona, it's becoming possessed by it. You build it to protect yourself, but slowly it begins to overshadow you. It speaks for you, chooses for you, reacts for you, until you can't tell where you end and where the performance begins. The collapse begins subtly. A moment of silence you can't fill, a question you can't answer, a flash of truth that slips through the cracks of your confidence. Jung said the ego inflates when it steals traits belonging to the self. It tries to act larger, wiser, stronger than it truly is. But nothing borrowed from the self can be sustained by the ego. And so the inflation begins to wobble. The posture becomes harder to maintain. You feel the pressure of carrying a version of yourself you know you can't hold forever. The collapse isn't dramatic at first. It feels like exhaustion, irritability, confusion, the symptoms of a psyche cracking under its own performance. Eventually, you experience what Jung called the total identification with the persona. You no longer act confident. You only know how to appear confident. And the gap between who you are and who you pretend to be grows unbearable. This gap becomes a kind of spiritual vertigo. You feel suspended between two selves, the one you show the world and the one you can't face. The persona begins to turn against you. It demands more energy, more certainty, more dominance, draining the little authenticity you have left. People think collapse is loud, but Jung knew better. Collapse is quiet. It begins the moment you admit, even for a second, that the persona is lying. In that moment, you feel the ground shift. The confidence you wore like armor starts slipping. You sense the truth rising from beneath the mask. And here is the difficult part. The persona doesn't fall off. It clings to you because it believes you can't survive without it. Jung wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain. The persona defends you from that pain, the pain of seeing who you really are." But when the collapse comes, it brings clarity. Not comfort, clarity. The truth appears with the precision of a blade. And you finally understand the paradox Jung spent his life teaching. The persona collapses not to destroy you, but to return you to the self you abandoned.
You can hide behind the persona in front of strangers, but not in front of the people you love. Relationships expose your fault lines. They reveal the fear that confidence was supposed to erase. Power becomes your language when vulnerability feels impossible. You assert, you correct, you dominate. Not because you want control, but because you fear collapse. Every conversation becomes a negotiation for emotional survival. The mask that protects you from the world becomes a weapon inside the relationship. It turns softness into danger and honesty into a threat. You stop listening because listening means letting someone close enough to see the cracks. Intimacy requires surrender, and surrender terrifies the ego. The inflated self cannot coexist with closeness. It needs distance to breathe. So whenever someone gets too close, you create space through silence, criticism, or coldness. Jung understood this dynamic deeply. He wrote that what we reject inwardly, we project outward. And in relationships, the persona projects strength while hiding the wound that silently demands to be seen. You begin to perform confidence even in private moments. You speak with certainty when you're actually afraid. You act emotionally distant because your real feelings feel too exposed. Everything becomes a stage, even your own bedroom. And the person on the other side feels the performance. They can't name it, but they sense the rehearsed tone, the defensive posture, the practiced calm. They feel the wall even when you think you're being warm. You don't fight because you're angry. You fight because being wrong feels like disappearing. You argue with force because retreat feels like humiliation. Conflict becomes a battlefield where your identity feels at stake. The tragedy is that your partner is not fighting you. They're fighting the mask. And the more they try to reach you, the more the persona hardens. What was meant to protect you ends up suffocating the relationship. Intimacy dies when honesty becomes dangerous. When being seen feels like a threat, love suffocates under the weight of your performance. You can't receive affection because affection touches the parts you're trying to hide. Power promises stability, but it gives you isolation. It keeps you safe, but it keeps you alone. It creates a love where one person stands on a pedestal and the other stands at a distance, and neither feels held. The persona thrives on roles, the strong one, the wise one, the unshakable one. But love doesn't need you to be unshakable. It needs you to be reachable. And a role cannot be reached, only a person can. There comes a moment when the persona falters, a moment when your partner's hurt pierces deeper than you expected. And for a second, the performance slips, and the vulnerability you've been hiding shows through. Jung said the meeting of two personalities transforms both. But transformation can't occur when one of those personalities is artificial. The persona cannot love, it can only defend. And so relationships break not from lack of love, but from excess of fear, from the refusal to be seen, from the worship of a mask that was never meant to survive intimacy. Power kills closeness, because closeness requires truth, and the persona fears truth more than anything.
There comes a moment when pretending becomes impossible. Not because you choose authenticity, but because the persona finally collapses under its own weight. And in that collapse, the truth you avoided stands right in front of you. You don't choose to lower the mask. It slips. It falls in a moment of exhaustion, or silence, or pain. And suddenly you're confronted with the face you've been hiding from yourself for years. The shock isn't that the mask breaks. The shock is realizing how much of your life was built around keeping it intact. How many choices, relationships, and beliefs were shaped to protect an identity that was never real. You try to lift the persona again, to hold it back in place, but it doesn't fit anymore. Its edges feel sharp, artificial, wrong. What once felt like protection now feels like suffocation. And in that uncomfortable silence, Jung's words echo with painful accuracy. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The real work begins when the illusion falls. The truth you see beneath the mask isn't heroic, it's human. It's fragile, insecure, unfinished. But there is a strange relief in finally seeing yourself without distortion, a freedom in admitting what you spent years denying. You start noticing the moments where you performed instead of felt, where you reacted instead of understood, where you defended yourself from people who weren't trying to hurt you, only trying to reach you. The collapse reveals something even more unsettling. The persona didn't protect you from others, it protected you from yourself. It kept you from feeling the fear you weren't ready to face. But now the fear stands alone, without a shield, and you realize it's not as monstrous as you believed. It's soft, almost childlike, a part of you that never healed because you never allowed it to speak. Looking at it directly is painful, but the pain feels honest for the first time. It doesn't humiliate you, it grounds you. It pulls you back into yourself with the weight of reality instead of the fantasy of control. You begin to understand the truth isn't gentle, but it is clean. It cuts through illusions, roles, and projections. It shows you what remains when performance ends, and what remains is the beginning of who you really are. For the first time, you feel the difference between confidence and presence. Confidence needs an audience. Presence exists even when no one is watching.
And presence is what the persona could never give you. The space inside you, once filled with noise and rehearsed strength, becomes quiet. Not empty, quiet. And in that quiet, something steady begins to rise. Something that doesn't need to be seen to be real. The truth of who you are isn't loud. It doesn't dominate, impress, or intimidate. It simply exists. Calm, grounded, aware. And standing in front of it feels like meeting yourself for the first time. And this is the paradox you never expected. When the mask falls, you don't lose yourself, you recover yourself. The collapse doesn't destroy you. It reveals the person who was always waiting beneath the performance.
There comes a moment at the end of every journey through the psyche when the question you feared the most becomes the only one that matters. Who were you before the mask? Not the confident one, not the invincible one, not the version you curated so carefully to survive, but the face beneath, the one that trembled, the one that hoped, the one that tried. You spent years rehearsing strength because you believed the world demanded it. Years polishing a persona that grew louder every time your truth felt small. But when the performance finally cracks, what emerges is not weakness, it's reality. And reality, unlike the persona, doesn't need to impress anyone. It doesn't need certainty or dominance or control. It only needs honesty, the kind that doesn't flinch when the light finds it. The face beneath the mask isn't perfect, it isn't polished, it isn't finished, but it's the only one capable of loving, healing, choosing, transforming. The persona could simulate connection, but only the real face can receive it. And now you see the truth that was hiding behind all that noise. You never needed to be extraordinary. You only needed to be present. Presence was always the doorway, and you kept guarding it like an enemy. When the persona shatters, what remains is simple, painfully simple. You, not the actor, not the projection, not the ego inflated by fear. Just you. And maybe that's the revelation Jung always pointed toward. The return is not grand or dramatic or heroic. It's quiet. It's small. It's a person finally meeting themselves without looking away. And as you stand there, holding the broken mask in your hand, you realize it never protected you. It only separated you from the life that was trying to reach you. But now, for the first time, you're able to step toward the world without hiding, without rehearsing, without playing a part. Because this time, you're not bringing the mask. You're bringing the face beneath it. If this moved something inside you, stay. We're building something for those who don't fake it. Subscribe, not just for the content, but for the confrontation. And if this left a wound, maybe it was meant to. Sometimes the best way to go deeper is to share the pain. Share it. After the mask breaks, there's always a moment when everything feels strangely quiet. Not peaceful, quiet. Like you're meeting the part of yourself that's been waiting behind the noise. What you do with that moment matters. Some people run back to the mask. Some pretend they didn't see what they saw. But if you let that truth stay, even for a second, something begins to shift. Not dramatically, not instantly, just honestly. Because the face you meet after the collapse isn't your weakness. It's the part of you that finally stopped pretending.